Hello and welcome to YouTube number 50, exposing the Jesuit Vatican shadow empire that has conquered the world by stealth, continent by continent, and nation by nation, and now controls China through its communist Masonic central government. Dear listener, you're probably listening to this because of curiosity about the title. You're probably having difficulty connecting Mao Zedong, Yale University in the USA, Skull and Bones, and the Jesuits. You might not even know anything about these entities. That's okay. Most people don't. Why is that? Well, it's because textbook mainstream history has been sanitized and the pertinent facts removed by the writers, some of whom know the truth and can't or won't disclose it, and others who refuse to believe the facts. You see, history and science are controlled by the Jesuit mainstream media, or MSM, which they own through proxy or front companies. This is a documented fact and must be accepted in order to proceed with the info in this video. Failure to do this is a waste of your time. I haven't spent countless hours investigating this just to write fiction or play some kind of joke on listeners. This is my small way of warning people that what they have been told by authorities or experts is misleading at the least and mostly trash at worst. Those in control of this world, the Luciferian Jesuits, understand very well that to maintain control of people it is essential to prevent them at all costs from learning the truth about their past. Simply, knowledge is power. So the Jesuits have rewritten world history and the history of science in the 20th century in order to shape the future as they want people to see it. Most people are too busy, lazy, or uncaring to check the facts and sound the alarm to others. Many others simply follow the mainstream narrative based on materialist principles, unquestioningly because it is easy. They do not understand the danger in not knowing. Many of those that have tried to warn others were, or are, right now, being silenced by the enemy of truth. These are the true unsung heroes of history. If you don't know anything about the Jesuits, please take a bit of time and go through the site pages in the links below and get some background on this evil, covert, religio-political military organization. Please read the Jesuit Oath also so you get an understanding of the Jesuits' true mind and goal of world domination. Then you'll see what they are attempting to do in China and the rest of the world. Okay, let's put a face to the evil I'm talking about. The four Jesuit superior generals who planned and oversaw Mao's bloody communist reign of terror in China through the OSS, CIA, and Skull and Bones Society over 56 years, from 1920 until his death in 1976, are Franz Xavier Wernz, Vladimir Ledachowski, Jean-Baptiste Janssens, and Pedro Arrupe. These four men alone are responsible for planning much of the war and bloodshed of the 20th century. Sound incredible? Well, it does sound incredible, but there is much documented proof. Why is Mao Zedong so important? In simple terms, this man was selected, trained, and used by the Jesuits through their Skull and Bones and OSS, the precursor to the CIA, agents to exterminate, eradicate a whole strata of Chinese society, including its traditional culture and religion, and in particular Protestant Christianity. In order to control the world, it was first necessary to totally subdue the most populous country in the world and transform it into a future economic sword to be used against the USA and indeed the whole world. And this is all done under the guise of free trade. Using Mao as an avenging angel, the Jesuits destroyed all resistance of the people through a strategy of constant agitation from a two-party conflict, civil war, and then intra-party conflict between the different factions of the Communist Party, grinding down the resolve of a nation of 56 people groups, then numbering some 700 million people, and now numbering some 1.3 billion people. Through long decades of suffering and deprivation, the Chinese people would come to long for peace and safety and capitulate to Mao's tyranny in order to obtain them. So what we take for granted today in the Western world, as far as freedom and peace, the Chinese have not known this for a long, long time, and they long for this peace, and they were willing to obtain it at any cost. What we are told about Mao is a mishmash of fact and fiction. In fact, one has to really dig to find the truth about who he was and how and why he was able to do the things he did. Most books written about Mao were orchestrated by the Jesuits using their bought journalists who presented a favorable picture to the West of this depraved and corrupt man. There are enough facts available outside of MSM sources now to get a fairly clear picture of what happened. I have attempted to summarize the salient facts here, along with web URLs, so you, the reader, can get the truth without having to read volumes and volumes about it. Mao is undoubtedly the greatest killer out of all autocratic rulers in world history. No other Luciferian tyrant comes anywhere close to him. Estimates based on population loss put the figure between 70 and 80 million people murdered. By comparison, he makes Genghis Khan look like a schoolboy. Mao had written in the early 1920s that China, and I quote, must be destroyed and then reformed, unquote. His cold-blooded dedication to the systematic destruction of old China and his unwavering loyalty to his Jesuit masters is unparalleled. With Joseph Jugashvili Stalin of Russia, another savage Jesuit Luciferian puppet and mass murderer, coming in second place at 40 to 50 million victims. History has never seen this kind of bloodletting by single individuals in such a short space of time. Adolf Hitler at number 3 falls far behind with a terrible but still modest tally of 20 to 30 million dead compared to Mao and Stalin. Yet Hitler has been reviled the most out of the three, almost to the point of distraction, with almost complete silence on the horrors that occurred in Russia and China. Why is that? Well, the Jesuits want everyone to concentrate on Hitler and the Nazis, and this takes everyone's attention right off Russia and China. And Russia and China are a big part of what is going down today. Mao Zedong's purge of the Chinese people killed off all the educated and wealthy families whose fortunes were confiscated, and you'll see this happen time and time again throughout history, where the Roman Catholic Church confiscates the wealth of its victims. And these were deemed as opposition to the Jesuits and their aim of putting into place a servile communist regime totally under the dictate of the Roman Catholic Church. And of course, this goes on secretly today. Through wholesale slaughter, torture, deprivation, and terror, Mao reduced the Chinese people to abject poverty and slavery. All fascist dictators do this, ensuring compliance and complicity of the people through fear of pain, suffering, and death. The new China, funded secretly by the Jesuit-controlled Roman Catholic KOM, or Knights of Malta bankers, through the USA, Wall Street, has risen on the mass grave of the victims to dominate world commerce and trade, just as the Jesuits intended. China is being used as a sword to influence world events, just as the Jesuits did in Russia with their Wall Street Vatican bankers funded 1917 Bolshevist revolution and onward. So the Jesuits have done in China. They're doing the same thing. They're using American money to fund revolution, genocide, and communism in other countries. And of course, this eventually is going to come back to the USA. There is no doubt about that. Dear listener, the strategy is always the same. First, they foment a bloody revolution to clear away the old order and any opposition. Then they institute an autocratic regime they can control, who then, through propaganda and mind control, brainwash succeeding generations of children into passive servility. Advanced technologies, weapons, and finance were funneled into China secretly from the USA and Russia in return for obedience in cooperating with the Jesuits' long-term plan for a new world order, world government. There is a powerfully demonic mix of high finance, political and spiritual power, and Luciferian sorcery driving the Jesuits' wicked 500-year-old plan. Mao's early history. Mao Zedong was born on December 26, 1893 in Shaoshan Village, Hunan Province in China. His father, Mao Yichang, was a formerly impoverished peasant who had become one of the wealthiest farmers in Shaoshan. Mao described his father as a stern disciplinarian who would beat him and his three siblings, the boys Zimin and Zitan, as well as an adopted girl, Zijian. What Mao doesn't say is he was rebellious and lazy and refused to work and help his family, so frequently fought with his father, and this formed his ungrateful, spoiled, and eventually diabolically vengeful persona. He loved his mother, who never disciplined him, but hated his father, who tried to guide his future. He even walked away from an arranged marriage at 14 and claimed never to have consummated the marriage. This wife died within a year, but we aren't told the cause. Mao became a Buddhist like his mother, Wen Qimei, but abandoned this faith in his mid-teenage years. Here we see the attempt at religion, but the quick abandonment of the spiritual quest at an early age for the pursuit of material pleasures. In 1901, at age 8, Mao was sent to Shaoshan Primary School. Mao read voraciously and developed a political consciousness from Zheng Guinyang's booklet, which lamented the deterioration of Chinese power and argued for the adoption of representative democracy. In 1909, at age 16, Mao moved to a higher primary school in nearby Dongshan, where he was bullied for his peasant background. Here is further mistreatment suffered and deeper bitterness and hate accumulating in the young Mao. In 1911, Mao began middle school in Changsha, which is now called Yale School. This is where Mao meets his Yale in China, skull and bones teachers from the USA who arrived to start the school between 1903 and 1904. There isn't 100% conclusive proof, but little doubt in my mind, based on all written accounts surrounding Mao's early life, that the Jesuits organized the Yale in China mission, as they had founded and controlled Skull and Bones, as well as all other secret societies worldwide, well before that date in history. Likely as early as 1814, when the Jesuits re-emerged and were reinstated by the Pope. Mao was a disturbed young man, a completely controllable, blackmailable puppet for the purposes of the Jesuit controllers. The 1903 Treaty of Shanghai between the Qing dynasty and Japan opened the city to foreign trade. Consequently, factories, churches, and schools were built. A college was started by Yale University bachelor agents, which later became a medical center named Ziyingya, and a secondary school named the Yale School. In 1904, Changsha was open to foreign trade, and large numbers of Europeans and Americans settled there. Changsha was the site of Mao Zedong's conversion to communism. Question: who recruited and groomed Mao, a middle school-age boy, for his future role as revolutionary dictator? It's obvious his teachers did. Mao Zedong was trained by the Jesuits about the tenets of communism. In China, Mao Zedong was helped and put into power by a well-known Jesuit anthropologist, Jesuit Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was in China between 1923 and 1946 when all this was taking place. This is the same Jesuit who orchestrated the Peking Man hoax in support of evolution and wrote New Age philosophy, which was very influential on the formation of the New Age movement. All secret societies foment and promote communistic revolutions to further societal destabilization, the destruction of independent, nationalist, sovereign governments, human freedoms, and the implementation of a fascist New World Order communist government under the power of Rome. All roads lead to Rome. This is the sole mission of the Jesuits and has not changed for 500 years. In achieving this, the Jesuits make the Pope an absolute world dictator. Okay, a little bit of information about the Yale School and the founding years. Brownell Gage, Warren Seabury, Lawrence Thurston, and Arthur Williams, all graduates of Yale School in the 1890s, founded Yale in China and brought the mission to Changsha between 1901 and 1905. In 1906, the mission's preparatory school, or the Yale School, began operations. My question, what is Yale doing in China at the turn of the 20th century? Well, what is the purpose? I can't think of any other purpose than to establish a school and to use it as a cover for the Jesuits. Revolutionary sentiment was strong in the city of Changsha. The question again is, who was behind the scenes fomenting this idea of revolution in Changsha? The Jesuits had already been working in China, recruiting young Chinese into the order from their schools dotted all over China for more than 200 years. Remember, the Jesuits had been in China since the mid-16th century. They'd been there a long, long time, teaching generations and generations and generations of young Chinese their ideologies. There are already 200 schools by 1687. So this begs the question, how many were there by 1911? Okay, one note here. Revolution is a Jesuit invention to destroy peace, order, civility, and social progress. There is nothing good about revolution. The result is always anarchy, betrayal, death, and ultimately loss of political, social, and religious freedoms. Anybody who celebrates revolution must be an idiot. According to history, if we look at wherever revolution has occurred, there has been massive loss of life and the destruction of all freedoms. And denial of this just is not intelligent. The mind boggles at how many millions of young Chinese students were willing and ready to blindly join a revolutionary cause and sacrifice themselves for no reason other than change, based on a whimsical utopian idea fed to them by foreign Jesuit teachers who betrayed their trust. Mao led millions of them to the slaughterhouse. Judas goat that he was, all tyrants betray and slaughter their own people without compassion or remorse. They always say, it's for the greater good. They are lying, murdering psychopaths, and they all work for Rome. The Jesuits always create two opposing sides, which they support, but inevitably one is betrayed, so the preferred side achieves a maximum kill rate in exterminating people groups viewed as obstacles to their plans. In particular, Protestant Christians of any kind and non-cooperative liberal Catholics and Buddhists. Okay, so just a few facts here. The Republican figurehead or nationalist opposition in China was Sun Yat-sen, an American educated Christian who led the Tong Menghui Society. Supporting the revolution, Mao joined the rebel leader as a private soldier but was not involved in fighting. When the Xinhe Revolution was over, Mao resigned from the army in 1912 after 6 months as a soldier. Over the next few years, Mao Zedong enrolled and dropped out of a police academy, a soap production school, a law school, an economics school, and the government-run Changsha Middle School. This record of dropouts is a clear sign of deficiency in character. He was unable to apply himself at anything because he felt superior to all these pursuits. Studying independently, he spent much time in Changsha's library reading core works of classical liberalism such as Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations and Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws, as well as the works of Western scientists and philosophers such as Darwin, Mill, Rousseau, and Spencer. Viewing himself as an intellectual, years later he admitted that at this time he thought himself better than working people. He had a superiority complex. Mao was a hypocrite, an elitist who then became the leader of a common cause, the struggle of the common man for an egalitarian society. What irony! He was inspired by Friedrich Paulsen, whose liberal emphasis on individualism led Mao to believe that strong individuals were not bound by moral codes, but should strive for the greater good, and that the end justifies the means, the conclusion of consequentialism. And please note here that the end justifies the means is a core Jesuit maxim. So right there in Mao's quotation, we have the evidence of the Jesuit mind. Befriending Mao, Professor Yang Changji urged him to read a radical newspaper, New Youth, the creation of his friend Chen Duzu, a dean at Peking University. And reading this newspaper, Mao accumulated many ideas related to communism. Mao graduated from First Normal School as a teacher in June 1919, ranked third in the year. Mao was invited back to Yale to teach, and a short while later was given the position of dean for 3 years. This is the Mao, Yale, skull and bones Jesuit connection. Okay, some facts about Mao Zedong, his true character. Mao was a pedophile, sex addict, and a serial rapist who had a constant stream of young virgin peasant girls brought to his bedroom day and night, according to his fourth wife, Jiang Qing. Mao abandoned all of his 4 wives and most of his 10 children, having little or no regard for familial love. He usually had a mistress in each of his marriages, which he then used to provoke his wives to anger. Mao was a deceiver and a killer who betrayed and murdered those closest to him when he felt threatened by them in any way. Mao was also enthusiastic about executions, child labor, torture, and organized public denunciation sessions for political figures who fell out of favor with him. Mao was motivated by a lust for power from an early age and had many political opponents arrested and murdered regardless of their relationship with him. Here are some myths about Mao. Mao never wrote his famous Little Red Book. It is almost certainly that Israel Epstein, a skillful propaganda expert and Mao's Minister of Appropriations, did. In 1917, Epstein came to China with his parents at the age of 2, and they settled in Tianjin in 1920. Epstein was a spy for Russia's Red Communist Secret Police. His cover was journalism. In other words, he was a Jesuit agent, as they already controlled Russia by this time. He began work in journalism at age 15 when he wrote for the Peking and Tianjin Times, an English-language newspaper owned by the Rothschilds based in Tianjin. He was one of the few foreign-born non-Chinese to become a member of the Communist Party of China. Mao was always portrayed as academic and a writer of poems, but it's highly unlikely he wrote the Red Book, as it embodies the Jesuit mind expressed as communist philosophy. Mao was not benevolent or caring of the Chinese people, ignoring the starving millions and exporting grain to Russia to pay for weapons while famine ravaged the countryside. His determination to use agricultural surplus to subsidize industry and the intimidation of dissent led to murderous famines resulting from the Great Leap Forward, maybe the greatest mass killing in history, estimated at 35 million people. His people died in the millions, and though he knew, he did nothing. Stalin did exactly the same thing in the Ukraine in 1932-33, killing 4 million people. Mao was selfish and irresponsible and did not believe in anything unless he could benefit from it personally. This was a claim made by many of those who worked with Mao over the decades, including his doctor Li Zishui, who attended to Mao for nearly 22 years. Mao's so-called great triumphs were only possible by the outside assistance or interventions he received from the Chinese nationalists, his so-called enemy or opposition, as well as the Russian and American intelligence and military forces who were all working together covertly under orders from Rome. Mao was no brilliant leader, and he personally avoided any danger to himself, sacrificing others needlessly. In other words, he was a coward. Mao is also portrayed along with the communist elite as a privileged person who was usually carried around in litters and protected from the suffering of his subordinates, rather than sharing their hardship on the 6,000-kilometer long march, which was nothing more than a farcical, extended holding pattern, propaganda exercise to build a mythical persona around him in the minds of the Chinese people. In many regional areas his troop passed through. Mao was a fake hero to be eulogized later by an ignorant, adoring public. What a twisted joke. The myth of Mao, the suffering but triumphant hero, was created by CIA journalists who created a fake history, especially Edgar Parks Snow in his Red Star over China, written in 1937. It's all propaganda, folks. Everything you hear about Mao Zedong is propaganda. Mao sacrificed thousands of troops in order to destroy all party rivals, and this was all financed by opium sales. He encouraged opium production, raising $60 million per year to fund his army and buy weapons. Yes, Mao was a drug lord, profiting from the misery of others. Mao also never took the initiative against the Japanese invading his country and grew angry when his forces did engage them. Why? It is because the Japanese were also working to the Jesuit program, and Mao was ordered not to interfere with them. We can thus conclude that the Japanese atrocities against the Chinese, and in particular the rape of Nanjing, where more than 300,000 Chinese were systematically exterminated, was covertly allowed to happen under orders from the Jesuits. Mao was complicit and never lifted a finger to stop this terrible tragedy perpetrated against his fellow Chinese. It would be safe to conclude Mao Zedong was a narcissistic, psychopathic megalomaniac and traitor to the Chinese people who considered all human life except his own as worthless. He was a cruel, capricious, and extremely deceitful manipulator who stopped at nothing to attain absolute power and at any cost. This is no less than a picture of the character of Satan himself. The Jesuits achieved so much in re-engineering China into their image through this demon-possessed papal stooge and sad excuse of a man. As a result, today the Chinese economic juggernaut is destroying industry and employment in other economies, producing and exporting cheap goods and consuming vast quantities of natural resources worldwide, thus creating scarcity and driving prices up. China is being used as a hammer to smash successful Western economies and prevent third world emerging economies from escaping the debt and poverty stranglehold on their countries. This is the Jesuit plan, to destroy white Western economies and thus their culture and civilization. All nations will thus be reduced to third world status, poor and unable to defend themselves, thus easy to control. There is enough evidence damning Mao Zedong for the venal, ruthless gangster that he was, responsible in his lifetime by his direct actions for the deaths of so many masses of people. It's important to understand that Mao could not have done what he did without outside assistance. There is no way. All the documented evidence points to this. He was allowed to proceed and carry to completion his mission of death and destruction because he was serving a foreign agenda. And in the pictures, there are photographs available of Mao Zedong posing with American military personnel in the 30s and 40s. So, what are American military personnel doing in China during this time of communist revolution? What are they doing there? Well, they're instructing him. They're training him. They're helping him to conquer his own land. Here's the Jesuit agenda. It's a lie to say that what was done by Mao was for the benefit of China and its people. Mao's mission had nothing to do with improving economics or modernization, but had everything to do with the elimination of people deemed expendable according to the program of covert masterminds. China was being purged of heretics who refused to submit to communist atheism and dictator worship. And this awful purge continues today. It is simply a continuation of the Roman centuries-old Catholic Inquisition, which, contrary to written claims by the Roman Catholic Church, has never ceased. And remember that there were many, many Christians in China. The Protestant missionaries had been in China from a very early date. And these were all being exterminated and purged by Mao Zedong and his communists. The Jesuits, through their OSS CIA Skull and Bones Society fronts and Knights of Malta, which they control, sought to remake China into a two-tiered atheistic culture of the poor masses ruled by a small, all-powerful, tyrannical elite, the Communist Party, with a fist of iron. This is nothing less than a modern version of the medieval Dark Ages, when the Roman Catholic cult ruled Europe and kept the peoples in fear and darkness, unchallenged for 1,000 years. The Jesuits succeeded, as they did in Russia and Cuba and in many dictatorships, large and small, in many countries on all continents over the last 100 years in particular. Do not be fooled by the apparent openness currently existing in China. The oppression of independent religious, ideological, and cultural groups is severe. Millions are still in labor camps or prisons, being tortured or executed because they refuse to obey the atheistic, materialistic dictates of the godless communist elite. The Chinese people are not free. In fact, no one is. Democracy is an illusion created to blind those who are being deceived. The Jesuits control every nation and are attempting to exterminate all who will not bow to their murderous worldwide religious system. China was one big step closer to the Jesuits' final goal. Dear listener, there's only one way to defeat the Jesuits and their one-world autocratic system that will soon plunge the world into darkness, and that is to reject that world system. Turn away from it and make Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior. The Jesuits hate Jesus Christ because they serve the Dark Lord, Satan, Lucifer, the prince of this dark world system. Satan was defeated at the cross 2,000 years ago, and his time controlling this earth has almost expired. He's angry and wants to destroy as many human souls as he can before Jesus Christ returns to earth to take his people home for eternity. Don't be one of those who are destroyed. Will you be there with God forevermore? Heaven or hell, it's your choice. There are no second chances after death. So now is the time to repent of your sins and turn to Christ for forgiveness. Jesus said, "All that the Father gives me shall come to me, and him that comes to me I will in no wise cast out." And this is found in John chapter 6 and verse 37. Also in John chapter 14 and verse 6, it states clearly, Jesus said unto him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes unto the Father but by me." There is no other way to be saved. My prayer is that you will find your way to the giver of life, Jesus Christ, and be washed, healed, and delivered from sin and death. Thank you for listening, and I pray that God will continue to open your eyes as you search for the truth on all things. Please share this information about Mao and Communist China and the Jesuit participation in it with others as you're able, so that they might also be awakened to the reality of this evil world system. I hope to see you in the next video.